Hello again. Thanks for tuning in. This is The Aftermath, and today we are talking tourism, and I'm discussing it with my colleague from the Melbourne office, Chris Schade. Chris, really good to see you.
Okay, likewise.
Now, tourism is a fantastic industry, no matter where you are in the world. It brings in valuable foreign currency. It employs lots of people. And the really big additional positive here is that you can employ lots of semi-skilled and low-skilled people too. There's lots of jobs. The money tends to spread in the local community, so that's fantastic. We know that there is a strong relationship with GDP growth. So in positive GDP growth years, the relationship's about 1.2 on average. However, in down years, we know there's a really powerful relationship there too. So for example, 2009, world tourism collapsed to the extent of 5 times the fall in GDP. Now, in that kind of scenario, which I guess we're replicating here, Chris, how would you sum up the current state?
It's a similar context. Pre-COVID, the sector had been a really good growth sector, growing faster than GDP over much of the past decade post the GFC. As you indicated, with the sort of multiplier of GDP growth. And a key driver of that was certainly Asia. So we've seen a massive increase in tourists, particularly out of China, over the last decade. And also, post GFC gave rise to an environment of fairly solid business travel. And also, we think we've seen a consumer shift towards experiences. So travel has really benefited from that shift. So that was sort of the outlook leading into COVID. And then obviously, then came the biggest shock the sector's seen, in probably a century. With peak revenue declines across key sector activities, whether it be, airlines or cruises or hotels or local tours of 60 to 80% plus, and in many cases, revenue declines are still sitting at those levels. So a dramatic shift in terms of revenue decline and therefore earnings decline. Helped to a degree by stimulus, which is obviously temporary. Yeah. So that delays as opposed to removes the impact. And then perhaps just a final point is the sector relies quite heavily on advanced customer payments for funding. So not only have we seen quite a large revenue and earnings hit, we've also seen basically a removal of a key funding source. So the sector is in pain, to be honest, and it's going to be a tough recovery from here. So in summary, a really challenging environment for the sector.
Okay, well that makes sense. So tell me, what do you think are the lasting impacts on the sector going forward?
It will take a long time for business and international travel to return to their pre-COVID levels. In terms of business travel through COVID, people have become much more familiar and comfortable with video networking tools. And we simply think a lot of business travel that might have been necessary or at least favoured pre-COVID won't be necessary in the post-COVID more connected world. We also think the industry will be significantly smaller going forward. So a number of players, particularly smaller players that don't have access to funding markets, will struggle to survive. As they go through the recovery process, unfortunately, they'll struggle to make it. Now, that provides a good opportunity for the survivors. So likely the larger players that do have their balance sheets in good shape can take market share on the other side of this crisis. So that means that just because the industry is smaller, their businesses don't necessarily have to be smaller. And we've certainly seen a lot of the more nimble travel businesses with better or at least more flexible management take this opportunity to remove some significant costs from their business and also shift the way of doing business. So more digitally enabled business, less face-to-face interaction. So that means they'll be more levered from a profit perspective to the ultimate recovery.
Yeah, that all makes sense too. So tough times for most. And when we turn to outlook, what do you see?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a mixed bag. The good news is domestic tourism accounts for around 70% of the global industry, and Australia, fits quite nicely into that statistic. So, there's quite a bit of optimism from the sector around, a domestic tourism boom without getting too excited. So, key drivers of that are pent-up demand from, being locked down and restricted to your local areas, and also an element of forced savings. So also, surveys of travellers show people are quite willing to travel domestically, certainly in their cars. So, shorter sort of trips, will probably do the best, at least initially. But even domestic air travel, people are much more willing to do than they are international travel. So that sort of bodes well for the domestic industry. But it's certainly on a sustainable basis while international travel remains closed. It's hard to see the domestic industry achieving the same level of overall activity. So we're still talking about probably quite significant decline. So it's still a challenging outlook, and we can't forget there's still the sort of delayed economic hit that stimulus is currently masking that will hit this sector quite significantly. As you mentioned earlier, there's that economic multiplier effect. So as I said, quite a mixed bag.
Chris, thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you all for listening and watching. Please send in your feedback, good or bad, as I keep saying every week. And tune in next week. We're going to move to another sector.